Some moments come close enough that you can almost touch them, and yet they leave without ever becoming real. Some moments come close enough that you can almost touch them. Close enough to feel real, close enough to rearrange expectations, close enough to make space inside your life for something that feels like it is about to arrive. And yet, they leave without ever becoming something you can hold, without ever crossing that invisible line between possibility and reality. What makes these moments difficult is not that they disappear, but that for a brief time they almost stayed, long enough to feel believable, long enough to feel personal. The word almost carries a very specific weight, because it does not mean failure and it does not mean absence. It means proximity. It means something came close enough to be imagined fully, rehearsed internally, and emotionally prepared for before quietly stepping back without explanation, without ceremony, without ever fully arriving. An almost moment does not feel unfinished in the way a clear ending does. Because endings provide structure, while almost leaves openness behind. And openness can linger longer than closure ever could. There are moments when nothing seems wrong. When the timing feels close, the feeling feels mutual, and the conditions appear supportive, and yet something subtle remains slightly out of place. Not visible enough to correct and not obvious enough to name, but strong enough to prevent the moment from becoming real. What makes these situations confusing is that they often lack a clear cause, because there is no single mistake, no dramatic conflict, and no clear reason to point to. Only a sense that everything was present except the final step that would have turned proximity into arrival, emotionally. The almost carries a different kind of weight than loss. Because loss acknowledges that something existed and ended, while almost asks you to sit with the possibility of what might have been without ever confirming whether it truly belonged to you in the first place. This creates a quiet tension where memory begins to mix with imagination. And the mind revisits moments repeatedly, not to relive them, but to understand where the invisible line was and why it was never crossed. Over time, almost moments do not disappear. They settle into memory differently, not as events, but as questions. These questions do not demand answers loudly. They linger softly, resurfacing during quiet evenings, during unrelated moments, or while watching someone else live a version of something that feels familiar but never fully yours. These memories are not heavy, but they are persistent. And persistence without resolution has a way of shaping how people approach future moments, often making them more cautious, more observant, and more aware of how easily closeness can dissolve. Most people do not know what to do with almost experiences, because there is no ritual for them and no language that fits comfortably. They are often carried quietly, folded into daily life without acknowledgement, treated as something too small to matter and too unresolved to release. Yet these moments quietly influence decisions, expectations, and emotional posture, shaping how much someone is willing to hope, how closely they allow themselves to approach future possibilities, and how prepared they remain for things that might never fully arrive eventually. almost stops being something that happened and becomes something that lives alongside us. Not as regret, but as awareness. Awareness that proximity does not guarantee arrival, and that not every meaningful experience needs to complete itself in order to leave an imprint. This understanding does not close the door on future moments, but it changes how the door is held open, with less urgency, less expectation, and more acceptance of the space between possibility and reality. After enough time passes, the emotional intensity fades, but the memory remains intact. Not demanding resolution, only recognition. As if the moment simply wanted to be acknowledged for what it was, something that came close, mattered briefly, and then stepped back without explanation. In that recognition, the almost loses its sharpness, becoming less about what did not happen and more about the quiet fact that it nearly did. Some things do not end, and they do not begin either. They simply stay close enough to be remembered, close enough to shape us, but never close enough to be lived. And perhaps that is why they remain, not as unfinished stories, but as quiet companions, reminding us that proximity itself can be meaningful even when it never becomes more than that.